Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mike Caston and Peter Abrahamson talking about mental health in general and mental health in the legal profession in particular. Sorry. We pick up topics that either we've been thinking about individually or that are sort of in the public domain being talked about a lot. And the one we have decided to talk about today is some lawyers actually do have traumatic cases. We often think about what lawyers, solicitors, attorneys do as being very desk bound and not particularly exciting for those outside the field, conveyancing. And in your case, Mike, I'm not saying what you're doing is boring, but intellectual property is not the most traumatic stuff that you can deal with. There might be a lot of emotional stuff involved from the client side when things don't go according to plan or a case drags out or whatever. But this, as soon as we start moving into the other aspects of the legal field, such as family law and criminal law, for example, you do get to see cases and hear stuff and see stuff that you would probably rather not deal with. And then what do you do afterwards? When you've had a client crying their eyes out in front of you because of domestic abuse, for example, or if you have been reading autopsy reports, watching the pictures, then what do you do when you go home?
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting question, and it's true that for my practice, intellectual property, litigation, licensing, helping folks get patents or trademarks, or usually sort of business type issues, not the top of mind when you think of sort of traumatic experiences, and certainly not as emotional and loaded as dealing with the divorce or criminal matters. So it's not necessarily something I connect with in my everyday, but I definitely know people who practice in those areas. My mom practices immigration law. My sister also does. They deal with criminal matters sometimes, and like a police officer, like a lot of times you're seeing people and trying to help them, on their worst day. And I think it's true that and I think we have to give some thought to how we take care of ourselves when you are taking in other people's stories and emotional moments, and how you kind of safeguard yourself. And then, because that can be a lot. It can be a lot in a lot of different ways.
In my profession, we have something called supervision, where you have teamed up basically with another therapist, and you can then run through a difficult case, or you can talk about your own feelings and emotions after a difficult session, for example. That's standard practice, and we all recommend it to have one of those, not to share gossip and small talk, but to get to the point where it hurts, where it matters, so that when I go to bed, my mind is clear. I haven't got all the baggage. But for lawyers, I know that some companies, some organizations do have some sort of support service. But I also hear from my clients that it often doesn't exist. And then they have to deal with and process all the complicated and traumatic things that they have dealt with. So it's different to what we call the blue light services, fire and rescue and police. Certainly in the UK, they all have occupational health service as part of their organization, who then step in and take the mental load off after a massive car crash or something.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear that exists. I mean, of course, as I was speaking, I was thinking, well, Peter's a therapist, right? People are dumping really difficult emotional circumstances on you all the time. So it has to be top of mind to sort of protect yourself from that, and to have someone to process that with, to make sure that you're not loaded down by it and that you can unload it. So it's interesting to hear that sort of buddy system exists, and that with your blue light example as well. And the other example that comes to mind is just reading about the people whose job it was at social media companies to review all the horrible things that people post and take them down, and the emotional traumatic load that has on people. So I know in the legal field, at least in terms of what I know, it's very ad hoc. It's very kind of person to person. You know, you might have a friend or a network that you do this with, or a buddy, you know, at work. But I don't know of any sort of systematic way that it's done, as far as I know, in the same way you said it's done, like in your field.
And I think that's to do with perception of what a lawyer is, what a professional person is. They are this sort of professional persona that it has no feelings. They can just look at a case, they can deal with the merits of the case, and then they go home. But as you well know, lawyers are also human beings. And we can all have a difficult case, but when you've got one day in, day out, it can start to accumulate in you, and you think, ooh, am I really cut out for this? And that is when you need someone to just dump everything on. And then, of course, who does it go to? Uh, there's got to be an end point somewhere. And I
Right.
think in my profession, what I experience is I can influence an outcome. I can listen and I can give advice and I can help. So in that way, it's not all just sitting with me. We find a way out of the problem. And I suppose that's what lawyers do as well, but in maybe a little bit more cold and clinical way, because we talk about compensation and who's the guilty party and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an intersection of different things. I don't know that it's all, you know, assuming that lawyers aren't human. Although I think, you know, that's part of it, right? It's this agent that whose job it is, and that you don't necessarily know that there are real emotions there or think about them necessarily. But I think it's also issues of confidentiality that we worry about, right? Like we're not allowed to
Absolutely.
talk about these things, and of course you can do it in a way such that you don't disclose confidential information. But you know, that's I think another issue. And I think about there's actually this very beautiful cartoon that I saw on Instagram like a month ago that someone shared. It's like a little short um, on what we carry around and how you transfer it to other people. And I'm not really sure what the point of it was, other than to show that there is that transference. I think it was saying it's a good thing, like it's better to let it out. But it was illustrated in this beautiful way, like you were black and white and gray, and then you sort of let it out, and there's some color that comes back, but the black and white and gray transfers to that other person. And like you said, there's got to be some endpoint. But it also just reminds me of the fact, what we're doing in modern leadership and the business world and in law firms is saying, like, it's better to be vulnerable and it's better to be authentic. But I think we really do have to keep in mind that when you ask people to be vulnerable and authentic, and take on these emotional matters and to take responsibility for them, right? Like in some sense, when you're the lawyer, and like in an immigration matter, you're trying to keep a family together and it's very emotional, and if you can't, you might take that on yourself. It's very, very hard. I think we have to pay some mind and think about this issue of how do we protect these people who are saying be vulnerable, and how do we protect ourselves when we're taking all that on. And I don't know that I know of a great answer, although it's interesting to hear that in other fields, that there is this function that I'd never really thought about as a lawyer.
And I think that's an extremely important point that you make there, Mike, the ripple effect, how you feel, how you send those signals, and it's contagious. So good mood is contagious, bad mood is contagious, feeling miserable is contagious. So you really can't have someone breaking down in tears in the office. Or should you? Because this macho attitude of I can cope with everything, it's taking our mental health capacity for granted. And that's where things start to go wrong, I think, when we just expect to cope with everything. So if you have a rough day at work, you go home, you may have a rough day at home as well. Now, where does it end? At what point are you allowed to just dump something on somebody else?
Yeah.
So I think from an organizational perspective, we do need to allow that space, physical and actually psychological as well, for someone to have that time where they can just let out all their frustrations and feelings about what they're doing, and still be accepted within the company and the community and not be ostracized afterwards, because it's just being a human being.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, maybe just to put a bow on it, I mean, I don't know exactly the right answer, but it sounds like at least we have the parameters of hey, like this is how we should treat people, and there should be some outlet. And I think one thing I could say that I've learned about myself and about the world is that just like sucking it down and trying to handle everything by yourself and trying to man up or tough up or work through it, that never works out well for me. Quite the opposite. So I think having this outlet in some sense, in some form, I think is really critical.
It is. And why don't we invite those watching this to come up with their ideas or their experiences? What have you got in your place of work? Is there something, or is there absolutely nothing? Would you like something? I'm available, but I can't fix the whole world. So we need to find methods within organizations to deal with the emotional stuff which we all carry around with us. So let's leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, and tune in again. And we always love to hear your thoughts on what we talk about. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.